Alrighty, gents. I've got a book. I borrowed Starship Troopers and gave the book back, but I made notes. Have to be this way. Okay, I'm this way. There we go. Now I'm in the middle. Maybe some more light, actually. Yeah. Okay. Now I got my light, got my book. So I'll be looking down the whole time because I'm remembering the dot points. But this is actually my second time shooting this. And the reason this is the second time I'm shooting this is because this author, you almost have to review two completely separate things. And he just touches on so many different things. So to summarize it, you're almost doing as much as he did. So there will be points that I miss, and I'm going to release like a short version of this. And if people really want the long one that I recorded, or they want like more detail, then I'll do it, but I don't want to add unnecessary length. So I'm going to keep it kind of short and sweet, pick a couple of points, and do it that way. So I'm going to start with the story, and that's the main narrative and the world, and then the actual point of the book, which is the moral slash philosophy slash, yeah, his points on war and fighting and that sort of politics and all of that, which the book is like that, with this little wrapping of a sci-fi book around it, so that people would actually read a book about philosophy and morals and politics. And so, story. It's a sci-fi story. If you've ever read The Forever War, the actual kind of in-world and tech is kind of the same. It's like a view of the future that's... It's kind of digital, but it's a lot of futuristic type stuff they can do. So they got spaceships, they can fly around. They got suits, so unlike the movie, because I'm reviewing the book, not the movie, and the two diverge quite a bit. Yeah, so I'm reviewing the book, not the movie, and the two diverge quite a bit. And weirdly enough, when you're watching the movie, sometimes they'll even have the quotes and stuff from the book. But when they're trying to create the scene, they're trying to make the exact opposite point. It's quite weird. So if you were to just read like the script for those scenes, you would get the exact opposite impression that you may get from watching the film. So it's a sci-fi setting. They start with you being a snapshot like 3/4 of the way ahead in kind of time, and you're with the main character. You're with the main character basically the whole time, because again, I think he was trying to appeal to young men, so the story is basically told from the perspective of one guy. So, you know, it's clever. And he's on a ship, he's got the jitters, he's about to go drop in his roided up Halo suit, down to go crush these little blue people, alien dudes. They're really not important. Actually, none of the enemies in this are important. You could just pretend that these enemies were the enemies for the whole thing without switching to the bug things that you see in the movie, and it would be the same. It'd be the same book. And the whole point is they're not nuking them. They're going down to just do like, oh look, we could have wrecked you, but we didn't. So team up with us and actually fight the bugs, as it's kind of implied later. And so he does that, and then you snap back to him as a team. And again, I'm zooming through this. So if you want like a detailed thing of the narrative of this, which if you've read the book or you even Wikipedia, like that's kind of all there is to it. So they go to him as a teen, and they talk about his reasons for joining. He's rich, so he had other options, but he chose to join. He does it because he was just going to walk along there, but then a girl that he likes is joining, and he pretends to be joining, and then he feels like he actually wants to join. And so he doesn't back out despite the people there pushing him to back out. And so here I'll have to kind of talk about the world. In this world, if you're a civilian, you pay taxes, you can be arrested, you have a passport, you're part of that country. But to be a proper citizen, as it comes up in the movie quite amusingly, which is where you can vote or hold political office, you have to have done federal service, which basically, it almost means military service, but there's some extra. So if you're like wheelchair bound, have an IQ of 60, they will find something for you to do. It's actually one of your rights that you can do federal service and earn your vote. Even if they find something pointless for you to do that no one would want to do, if you do it, and you serve a term, usually 2 years, All right, you can vote or hold office. And that's the kind of the one of the core things of this book in terms of narrative. So he's doing this, he's going to earn this ability to vote, and it really won't do anything for him if you're just talking about money. His dad was already a businessman, looks at the military and all of this. It's kind of just taxpayer sponges. And for that reason, the military try to convince you to tap out, basically quit. And you can quit it essentially any time. Like, you can be about to go on a mission. You'll be like, nah, not feeling it today. And they'll be like, all right, you're fired. Here's your money. Here's your corporate. Here's your military check, rather. You don't get to vote. Go home, and you can't try again. Okay, I have to put this thing on silent. Bloody phones, mate. Bloody phones. Yeah. So if you tap out, which they repeatedly try to get you to do, you just can't vote. In fact, if you desert, you go and hide. They don't even look for you. You come back like, okay, guys, you got me. And then they're like, okay, get this band of lashes, and then you're back to normal. A lot of the punishment in this book is like that. It's corporal and at times capital punishment, but the consequences don't stick with you, which is kind of cool. And it's a very rough kind of process in the military, but the actual society itself seems quite nice and relatively liberal. Or for the 60s. Because women are serving in the military and stuff, but a modern sci-fi author wouldn't write about women in that way now. So, because the book was released in 1959 from memory. And so he goes to the training arc. He's in boot camp, which is, he learns a lot of skills, a lot of character development, and it's made to filter people out. They want the majority of people to fail, same as the SEALs. And it's really just going through that. He builds as a character and develops, and the guy's clearly trying to make the point that the military will help develop your character, and yada yada yada. There's an interesting thing where the first time a punishment comes up, a guy strikes a military officer, which has the technical penalty of death, and the officer basically looks at it as his fault. Like, man, I'm meant to be such a badass. These guys aren't meant to be able to hit me. But the cadet doesn't get what's going on and blurts it out to that guy's higher. So then they're like, oh no, now we have to take this seriously. So they do like a mini tribunal so that the kid doesn't get the death penalty. They're actually taking it easy on him. He just doesn't realize that, and they can't say it. And then he gets lashes and gets discharged. And the officers around that officer and that officer himself all blame the officer. They're like, the kids are meant to be aggressive, pent up. They're meant to be in struggle town, and they're meant to be the kind of people who would be likely to hit someone if they get frustrated. Right? They're just meant to be nurtured to get to a productive end goal, where that's a good thing and not a bad thing. So everyone actually looks at that as the officer's failing. That's pretty interesting. Then the guy joins the military. They fight the bugs. It really, what happens with the bugs, whether they win or lose, isn't the point, and it's not stated strictly whether or not they get the win that they thought they had at the end. They definitely make... They capture some of the higher caste and stuff. I don't know if that means that they win overall. I don't think it does. And the way they paint it is that the enemy in this are quite capable and the people are quite capable. So anyway, the guy serves. He meets his dad and he goes to officer training. And really, other than him learning math and them showing like some interesting stuff about leadership, where it's actually very hard to do and you've got to manage so many things, it's just another opportunity. And so several times during boot camp, in letters to the high school guy, back when he was a kid talking to the high school guy, and now in a class at the officer training camp, there's like lectures or classes and stuff where the author basically just writes his moral and philosophical teachings, and because it's first person point of view, you're basically sitting in class with the main character, listening to it, which is really what this book is about. This book is a delivery system. This is like, sugar on the outside of a pill that's a painkiller. Like, the book is, in my opinion, not necessarily about this narrative, although parts of the narrative are used to support this message and kind of as an example. It's really packaging for this guy getting to discuss some ideas and having young guys and teens and stuff read it, because it's got pictures of aliens on the front. And TV sucked back then. Yeah, so that's really all the officer thing is, and it shows kind of his growth, which is again a central theme in this book, is like personal struggle and earning things is positive. And so you see him go through Struggle City again and work and earn something, and then it develops him and he's better for it. And yeah, that's it for storyline. So I'm going to go on to the morals now, and I can't cover them all. I call it morals, but it's like philosophy, politics, it's all kind of together. So the book shows like kind of a juvenile boy with poor reasons to fight who reveals better character as he's continually tested, and he just kind of has it in him. And he becomes better as the book goes on, which is interesting, and I think it's quite accurate. Like, some people who in times of war were amazing soldiers, potentially in other times would have been criminals, because they just have such an aggressive disposition, which is helpful if that's what's needed. But if it's not needed, it's like Winston Churchill was hugely popular in World War II. As soon as the war's over, yeah, they got someone else, you know? It's horses for courses. So I thought that sort of stuff was interesting, and this guy, they get it out of him, and it just ends up being a very positive thing for him, at least. And I found through kickboxing and stuff like that myself that has some truth to it, where if people have outlets for things that we would normally call negative temperaments, and if you have it under control, it can be a good thing. You know what I mean? Being more assertive and being more bossy, it's helpful. Being more of a people pleaser, as long as you know how to stand up for yourself, is good, because you can help maintain the social relationships of everyone in a group, so that you don't have all these people who want to be boss just arguing all the time and nothing gets done. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. People fist fight and to solve interpersonal disputes and almost like little dominance hierarchy things. And again, much like the punishment, the next day kind of all's forgiven, and it kind of earns the respect. Like, the guy actually loses one of the fights, and the other guy goes, "Oh, hit me," because he's now been promoted past him. And so he hits him, so it looks like he lost the fight, because even by fighting and losing to the other man, he earned his respect, and now the guy's like, okay, I'll allow you to lead me, even though I actually beat you in the fight, in the dominance contest. The fact that you're rough and ready means I respect you now. Which just kind of makes sense, in a weird way. Because it's like, okay, well, this guy's at least got some substance to him. He's not going to, like, give me stupid orders that are going to get me killed. Combat earns respect in this, amongst the soldiers in this, and I actually found this quite realistic. So if you haven't been in combat, people almost don't want to know you in the book, and you can't call them by their nicknames in one example, and they kind of like haze and push you to the side a little bit. Not too bad, but that sort of thing, until you see real combat and they know whether or not you have substance or not. And I thought that's quite realistic. And you hear about the same sort of thing in any place that's high in violence, like jails or any of that. If you don't have to like someone, but people will leave people alone, and there's kind of a currency to being competent around violence. And I imagine that goes for soldiers. Being berated, punished, kind of, you know, people on you all the time is seen very positively, much like the fist fighting and the corporal punishment. And it makes sense in this context, because if you have incompetent people, they'll die and get the people around them killed. It's probably better for them to fail, quit, and go home and stay alive. So that's how this is presented in this book. He argues against avoiding violence, and that you'll lose freedom if you don't constantly fight for it. And that this is one of the things that gives freedoms its value, and that this will end up making you a victim and kind of makes bigger problems later. More bigger problems. And, like, again, an aspect of this is true, but in his book, he makes this very simple, because the enemy that you switch to, the bug-type ones, are literally mindless, just attackers. You can't negotiate with them, so the whole pacifist argument, in the context of the book, doesn't even make any sense. And it's an interesting way of him having this conversation without having to really address that point too much. Although he does later on, if I can get to it, but I'm not going to make this too long. Being in infantry / the military in general is looked down upon by the rich people. It's seen as like, oh, if you're poor, sure, go ahead, that'll probably help you, but why would rich people do that? But to other people who have served, for example, in the mobile infantry, which is the guys in the halo suits, you get just instant respect. So even if someone's an officer, or was an officer, and you're a private now, as soon as you're not needed to do formalities, there's like a respect there and a camaraderie. And again, when you hear about people who have been in situations where they're around violence or around high levels of hardship, that kind of camaraderie seems to be quite a theme. So the book probably gets that right. This was weird. He argues that man has no moral instincts or rights, and he has a very kind of harsh view on punishing children. So he argues, you should hit children and all that sort of stuff. Pretty predictable considering it's in the 60s. But I think this idea that people don't have moral instincts or rights, so it all has to be taught and it all has to be enforced, kind of makes more sense why he would think that. And I think a lot of people would disagree that humans don't have moral instinct. He talks about a planet where there's very little radiation, so everything mutates at a low rate. And because of that, there's not a very fast rate of evolution, and there's basically not much competition. So plants can just kind of grow where they want to grow, and they're not in huge competition with other species. And when humans come there, anytime we try and plant crops or whatever, it just completely runs over what was there before. And I feel like that is a metaphor that he uses several times, and he kind of believes in at multiple levels. So I think he believes that humans should always be in some state of conflict, or that you personally, because it's kind of at different levels, you personally should be at some kind of struggle, and that's positive. Otherwise you'll become weaker and you'll just be outperformed by someone that has done that. And I remember this linked... yes. The point I kind of got from him was that pacifists would basically be replaced by non-pacifists. That's kind of the point that I took from the planet example. And that's why he, thinks that people who have served in the military should be able to vote and do political service, kind of stems from that. It's inevitable, we're going to have to do it. And that the reason that those people are more qualified to lead essentially boils down to they've done something where they're kind of responsible for the society, and they're doing something selfless, and that earns you the right to vote, and your vote is more meaningful because you had to earn it. He also states value is scarcity, and also how hard something was to get, in essence. I can't remember exact wording. So because you had to earn your vote over 2 years, and there's a smaller pool of voters, your vote will be more valuable, either to you or to the society. It will be used more responsibly. He argues that modern democracies give you all this responsibility and this huge weighting on your vote. But if you vote badly and the economy loses $1 million, it makes a very small difference to you in your personal day-to-day life. And you might just be an irresponsible or bad person, which is an inherent democracy problem. And I think this is his attempt to solve it, is like, you shouldn't do it with more intelligent people. You can't filter for more harder working people. So you just have to do people who've done like an act of service for society. And, some idea like this, I imagine, that includes people who have been a doctor for 10 years, done multiple different kinds of service where different aspects of struggling or serving the community were recognized, isn't necessarily even a bad idea. So, and this isn't necessarily the full extent of his idea. This is it at one point in a way that he could package and hide within a sci-fi book, and that he thought young people would read and be sympathetic to. So maybe he makes these very simple, like glaringly obvious times where he's just getting to have his say in a letter that does nothing except for him to have his say. It's really obvious to the point where it's annoying at times. Maybe he thought that would be more understood by young people. So maybe his ideas are not this simple. And I know some people take objection to things like the evolution example and stuff, because they look at it as like social Darwinism and things like that, which I don't necessarily believe he's guilty of, although maybe. Oh yes, yes. This is the one I'll finish on. Morals are a survival adaptation, and war is some kind of expansion or extension of that idea. And he argues that if something's not expanding and going through some kind of rough process that's going to keep it strong, that it will be replaced by something that does. So that's that pacifists replaced by non-pacifists argument. And if you looked at a group of animals, for example insects, one that will attack other species and one that doesn't, that are otherwise the same, you would expect the ones that attack the others to outbreed the ones that don't. You know, all other things considered. And I think he views that as like on a social level as well. So the country will be replaced unless it's being kind of imperialistic and expanding. And the aliens in this are very competent, and he doesn't know who's going to win, but both sides are doing the same thing. They're both expanding territory, they're both taking over planets, they both have military equivalents at least. You know, the bugs have a warrior caste. And I think that really is how he views the world. As if you're not doing something, if you're not doing some kind of competition as a person, you're going to become a weak person. If you're not struggling as a person, you're going to lack character. If the country isn't expanding, isn't growing, and in his case, the agreement he makes, isn't in some kind of conflict, then the country will become weak and replaced by one that does. And I think that's why he wouldn't even view pacifism as moral. Because in his mind, or at least in the system that he puts forward, that I'm interpreting at least, those people would just be wiped out and replaced by someone that isn't doing that. So you're not really preventing violence, you're just getting the people in your country killed and then replaced by people who will do some level of violence, even through proxy wars, which he does kind of address to a degree. So I think the book's interesting. I think things like the capital punishment was probably the most interesting one, where he doesn't even actually give you an answer. He more just says, I'm happier with people who are messed up and have done like evil things. So this is a death penalty. I'm happier with them getting capital punishment, but he does give some address to the other side where, oh, what if they're sick and they could be broken? You know, they're broken and they could be fixed. You know, they're sick, they could be healed, sort of thing. And his answer is, oh, I don't know. He goes both ways, but he's like, he ends with, it's probably better still to have the death penalty, which I thought was interesting. That's the only time he seems to really play both sides fairly. Unlike when he calls Plato's Republic, what was it, like, ant-like communism, and then just moves on. Which I thought, you know, it made me laugh. I don't know if it's necessarily the most convincing way to convince people, but it is intended for a younger audience, I think. He makes the argument that to slap on the wrist, slap on the wrist, slap on the wrist when you're a juvenile, and, you know, weak parenting, no slapping as a parent, then these kids land at 18 and 19, then they break a law, then they go to jail. Now they've got a record, they're never going to get a proper job outside of, you know, working in warehouses and stuff. And it depends which country you live in, but he lives in the States, so this is kind of the reality there. He sees that as cruel, so instead, you know, smack your kids. This will allegedly make them into, you know, people with less habits likely to land you in jail if they kept going on. And then if someone breaks the law even as an adult, capital punishment and all of this sort of thing. And then, you know, when you heal, you're good. You walk around like everyone else. It doesn't seem like the most complete, you know, judicial system, where it's like, yeah, I don't know, because certain people wouldn't really care if they got caught, you know what I mean? Because a lot of criminals tend to be people with aggressive and violent temperaments, and if the punishment's getting physically harmed, well, that's kind of the consequences of many of their actions, e.g. conflicts with other gangs and things like that. So I don't know if that would be as effective, but it definitely wouldn't leave like millions of dollars per city in the United States for jails, just all over the country, and then all these people in these jails. You know, maybe it's it's kind of crueler short term, but kind of long term. That's actually, I would say that's probably the central theme of the book. He thinks things that are kinda in the short term are actually cruel long term, and the inverse. And so a lot of the time, being harsh now is better later. He never actually explicitly says that, but just it seems like a unifying idea and theme through a lot of his ideas. You know, the groups being replaced by groups that do a certain level of conflict. The fact that the military and getting screamed at and made to do, you know, a million push-ups and run and all that in the cold makes him better. He clearly presents that idea as being good over and over, and that's good. I think I'm going to be able to edit that to about 25 minutes, hopefully. Keep it short because the last take was like 35. All right, cheers, catch us.